Increasing student engagement. What is student engagement? Take just a second and think about for yourself. What is your definition of student engagement? One definition is that engagement is the amount of physical and mental energy required to stay involved and motivated to learn about a given topic. And usually there are three different dimensions involved. There's vigor, dedication, and absorption. So vigor is the amount of effort that's used. They will expend a lot of effort. They will try multiple times. They keep working to try to get past the barriers. That is vigor. They're dedicated. They feel good about it. This is for a good reason. I'm learning this information. It's a challenge. I'm happy to do it. And they're absorbed. They're very concentrated on whatever it is they are working on. So why do we care if students are engaged? And it is simply true that at all academic levels, K through 12, undergraduate, professional programs, anywhere it's been looked at, the amount of student engagement is strongly correlated with academic performance. So we want to try to increase engagement in our students because it will help them succeed academically. So why might they not be engaged? And first of all, to think about would be student factors. Academic fit is what you call sort of the coming together of what a student feels they need to learn or prefers as they learn with what the college can offer. So for example, there were some students when some schools went to all problem-based learning that just absolutely could not stay in that school because that was not how they learned at all. Some students do not want pass-fail for an entire curriculum. That is not how they learn. And so sometimes it's just not a good fit, and it's very hard for the student to be engaged because they're not fitting in. They're not fitting in academically, they're not fitting in socially, it's just not working for them. Sometimes the student factor is mindset. So there are two kinds of mindset, fixed mindset and growth mindset. Some people also calling that an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. So students who have more of a growth mindset, they have what's called an internal locus of control, meaning they believe that they're in charge, they can show growth through their own efforts. They tend to be more engaged and to do better academically than students with a fixed mindset or an external locus of control, where they believe it's all sort of out of their hands and they might learn and they might not. There might also be curriculum factors, and we all know that our curriculum is very densely packed. There's so much for the students to know in our curriculum, and it's very difficult for the students to keep up, and especially if it's something that they do not perceive has value for them in the future. They are never going to work with that species, or they are never going to do that kind of work. I don't want to be a surgeon. I don't want to be a dentist. It makes it very hard for them to care about surgery and dentistry, and they're less likely to be engaged. So what can we do to increase student engagement? One thing we can do is provide good learning objectives so they know completely what they're expected to do and know from your class. What is the absolute minimum bar that they need to do to be able to say, I have completed the work for this course? And be very clear that everything is aligned. All the assignments, all the test questions, everything matches what you put in those learning objectives. Then at least they know where they need to be, and that helps make them more engaged. Make sure they understand why we're doing what we're doing as a way of it helping them be a veterinarian. So they understand, no, you are going to practice actually talking to a client because that's something you're going to do every day as a veterinarian, so it's time to practice it now when I can give you feedback to do it. And as you begin a session, sometimes it helps to ask students what they already know. It helps you find misconceptions, but it also helps them understand, oh my gosh, we're talking about renal disease in cats. I know this is hugely important in aged cats. And it never occurred to me, I know so very little about why we do what we do. I've watched the vet I work for give fluids, but I don't know why, and I've never thought about it. So sometimes getting them to talk about what they already know automatically engages them more broadly in the topic. You can ask open-ended questions. Students are more likely to answer open-ended questions because they're seen as being less risky. There is no one answer. So you might ask, if we're talking about renal disease in aged cats, can anyone tell me about anything that they've seen that was used as a treatment for renal disease in aged cats? There's a zillion things that they could say, and many of them would be right. And so it's just easier for them to be engaged and to answer that question. You can incorporate student questions or discussions into the course, which helps them see the value of what they're bringing. When I come back to a lecture and I say, hey, I got a super good question after the course was done last time. A student asked me about X, Y, and Z, and it occurred to me I hadn't really explained that fully. You just watch that student blossom. Even if you don't point out who it was, they know who they were, and they understand that was important enough that the person who's teaching the class took time to talk about it the next time. Hugely important in keeping the students engaged. You can give students choice. So oftentimes when you're giving an assignment, you could say you can do this in the dog or you can do this in the cow. Or you could say you could try this drug or you could try that drug. The other way to give them choice is to say here's different ways you could submit it. You can give me a written document, you can do it orally in a video. You give them options, and those options help keep the students engaged. And then you should encourage students to reflect on the learning process. This is hard because students don't like to reflect. They feel like there's somehow a correct reflection answer that they're not getting, when of course there cannot be. I mean, everybody's going to have their own reflection, but the students oftentimes feel like this is kind of a trick, like we're looking for an answer and they don't know what to put down. And so when you ask students to reflect on it, make sure that they know it's about what did you take from this? What are you going to remember from this? How are you going to use this in the future? Think about your own materials that you use. Think about how you can use them as ways to help students reflect on what they got right and what they didn't get right, and why they should use that information differently in the future. And then finally, recognize that many students are quiet students and they're going to be unwilling to speak up in class. And for most of them, this is because they feel judged, not necessarily by the instructors, but by their classmates. Although they know that being quiet, they're getting judged, they feel if they open their mouths, they will definitely be judged. And so oftentimes, if you're trying to look for student engagement and you're basing it just on in-class participation, you're not going to see it from the quiet students, and that isn't fair to the quiet students. They may be very engaged and just unwilling to speak out loud. So think about using tools other than discussion. Think about think, pair, shares. Think about people submitting a small written thing about what's still confusing or what do you think about this case. Think about using polling tools. Things like that will help allow all the students to demonstrate their engagement and not just those that are more comfortable speaking up in class. And finally, recognize that the students have whole lives outside of us. I know we all know that, but we still expect them to come to class and to be engaged and paying attention. And that's really hard to do if one of their parents is ill or if their dog is missing or who knows what's going on. Our students go through some pretty big things over the 4 years that they're with us. And a lot of times that is going to really impact how they respond in class. So as an instructor, don't take it personally if a student doesn't seem very engaged, or if you really can't get a student interested in your discipline. They're not all going to like everything that we all do, and sometimes other parts of their life are just taking precedence. So don't assume that if a student isn't engaged, it's because of you and anything you're doing wrong. Sometimes it's just a sign that somebody needs to talk to that student and make sure that they're okay. If you have any questions, please contact the CVM Education Support Group at cvmces@umn.edu.